Did giants at one time roam the area that is present-day Ohio? I'm going to take a brief look into that. I composed this for a class project and only had a couple weeks to look into the topic, so I wasn't able to fully investigate the issue. I did brief initial research to determine whether there is enough evidence to warrant a more detailed future investigation. The video that is currently playing is a tour of 32 Nephilim burial mounds in Ohio. You may wonder why the videographer would call these Nephilim mounds. That's a great place to explain some background, as well as why I find the topic interesting. The Nephilim are a hybrid race with angelic fathers and human mothers. There is a biblical account in Genesis 6 of the sons of God having sexual relations with the daughters of men. They bore a race called the Nephilim, which means fallen ones. Some of these children were giants. The term sons of God is the Hebrew Ben Ha Elohim. This exact phrase is used in the opening chapters of Job when there is, what we would call in modern-day vernacular, a board meeting between God and the angels. This provides a rationale to conclude that the reference to the sons of God in Genesis 6 is referring to angelic beings. It's recorded in the book of Jude that there were angels who left their first estate and went after strange flesh. These angels were put into chains for their escapades. There is also a possible reference to these angels in the book of 2 Peter. To be fair to the viewer, there are differing interpretations of these passages, so even Bible scholars aren't in complete agreement as to how to view these strange accounts. There are also accounts of gigantic individuals in the Bible, the most notable being Goliath of Gath, a warrior who stood 6 cubits in a span. Converted to modern-day measurements, that would be 9 to 11 feet tall. There's also the account of Og, king of Bashan. He had an iron bed that was 9 cubits long, suggesting he may have been 12 to 15 feet tall. From this video, it's impossible to say whether these mounds were the burial places of giants. It can be stated with certainty that the mounds exist, and it certainly suggests a mystery that needs unearthed. Here is a short clip from a video looking into possible Nephilim giants in Athens, Ohio. This videographer combined video evidence with newspaper reports of giants in Ohio. There are legends about a giant couple that lived in Seville, Ohio. We'll join a couple who take a road trip to investigate this legend.
Captain Martin Van Bates, a.k.a. the Kentucky River Giant, and captain in the Confederate Army, was 7 foot 9 inches tall and weighed 470 pounds. His bride, Anna Bates, the Giantess of Nova Scotia, was even taller at 7 foot 11 inches tall and 413 pounds. Anna was discovered by P.T. Barnum and toured the world as a circus attraction. In 1871, while on tour, she met and fell in love with another circus giant. They soon married, and together they were the world's tallest couple. Sadly, they did have a baby boy who was buried with them. He only lived a day. The baby was the largest newborn ever recorded at 23 3/4 pounds and 30 inches long. The final resting place of this family can be found in Mound Hill Cemetery in Ohio. The grave is a large statue of Anna, who died first unexpectedly in 1888.
Jim Vieira is an investigator that looks into giants. He was a key researcher on a History Channel program called Search for the Lost Giants. He gave a presentation entitled The Giants of Ancient America. He does talk about evidence that points to advanced ancient cultures and the possibility of giants in Ohio.
And here's a map right here of the mound builders around the time the Olmecs, 1500 BC, the precursor to the Mayan, very sophisticated culture. Now the mound builders built well over 100,000 earthen mounds and geometric forms. This one is at Miamisburg in Ohio. Just really extraordinary works of art. So we have the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, and the serpent belief, the serpent religion is everywhere to be found around the planet. And Native peoples have a lot of the same, beliefs about the past, about the serpent culture, about ancient androgyny, a lot of the things you find in the Holy Land or in the South America, these kind of strange ideas of floods and civilizers who showed up after the flood, if you will. You find in the mound cultures a real level of sophistication, a spiritual sophistication, and astronomical and geometrical sophistication. Right here, the equinox and summer solstice, sunrise and sunsets are cataloged in this great earthwork. At Newark, Ohio, it's one of my favorite sites, you have a circle and octagon that is linking to another circle and octagon 55 miles away in Chillicothe. And it was believed there was a great road, the Great Hopewell Road, that was, I think, 19 feet wide, several feet high, that went on like a processional way for 55 miles to get to another site. And from this place, you could understand and predict eclipses. The natives understood the 18.61 Metonic cycle of the moon. And in the 1980s, two academics from Earlham College in Indiana, Hively and Horn, they went to this site basically to debunk the idea that there were any alignments here. Just like people debunked the idea that Stonehenge held any astronomical knowledge. In fact, you go back in the 70s or 60s, or maybe even the 80s, just these ideas were considered, outrageous or pseudoscience, like you get a tinfoil hat on if you suggest that ancient peoples aligned to celestial events. So what they found was it was actually a lunar calendar that could predict eclipses and understood the Metonic cycle of the moon. And here is that long processional way that I talked about. So ancient Ohio and the entire Ohio River Valley was basically like a blackboard of college geometry with these incredible geometric forms everywhere. Here's an aerial shot of Newark earthworks. Very precise and a lot of intent behind the geometry and mathematics at these sites. And there are a number of these. A lot of them were destroyed, unfortunately, but they were surveyed by Squire and Davis of the Smithsonian. And this basically is a proof of how wrong the early racist leaders of our society were about Native people. And I can't stress that enough, because not only did we dismiss and denigrate these people and their culture, we didn't listen to any of their wisdom. We didn't sit with the leaders and the wisdom keepers and figure out what was going on in this country and how long did people live here. And they were telling a completely different story. And at the time, like the Dr. Hrdlicka from the Smithsonian, he believed that there were only people in the Americas that went back 2000 BC. And a lot of these hyper-isolationist theories of the early scientists have been proven wrong. And theories that have been the gold standard of archaeology and anthropology continue to be proven wrong. I ask, what else do we have wrong? What did we get wrong? So, Old Royal Tomb unearthed in Ohio. There's all these reports and accounts and artifacts that tell a different story of the past. And at one site, the original Hopewell site that Warren K. Moorhead unearthed, he found artifacts from all around the country, from the Gulf of Mexico, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, silver from Canada. There were massive trade routes all around the United States. A sophisticated trade network existed. So for me, I studied the mound builders, and it brought me into this idea of giants, if you will, because if our modern science could be so wrong about a people and so wrong about the past, maybe these legends and tales and religious documents that speak about giant humans, that maybe there's something to it. Here's another example from Ohio. The skeleton measures 8 feet from the top of the head to the ankles, the feet being missing. The skull is large enough to fit as a helmet over the average man's head. The skeleton was one of several buried in the form of a whale under a mound with the feet toward the hub. That's another interesting thing. There are specific burial techniques that are embedded in these accounts. They're pretty obscure, only known to archaeologists that do excavations, like buried in the form of spokes of a whale, buried in a seated position facing the east. So once again, if these are hoaxers, they're somehow picking up on these strange and obscure Native American burial techniques and putting them into their accounts. That doesn't seem very likely to me. Accounts, including Smithsonian ethnology reports, do talk about that. These ancient remains, upon exposure to the air, crumble to dust. And I think I was accused of kind of conjuring that idea up so I didn't have to produce skeletons. That was one of the TEDx rebukes I got. which is infantile and pathetic. You know, I'm just going off these accounts by noted and respected individuals, but neither here nor there. This is Miamisburg in Ohio, really cool mound builder site. And right near here, this is one of my favorite accounts, 8-foot, 1.5-inch skeleton was found. And right here, anthropologists from around the country gather here. There are pictures of this skeletal find. Right there, it is listed among the largest giants of all time, like Charles Byrne, the Irish giant. And the head of the Smithsonian Anthropology Department, Thomas W. Wilson, shows up on the scene, and this is what he says about the find. The authenticity of the skull is beyond doubt. Its antiquity is unquestionably great. To my own personal knowledge, several such crania were discovered in the Hopewell group of mounds in Ohio. Pretty straightforward from the head of the Smithsonian Ethnology Department in the late 1890s, I believe. And, you know, say what you want. They didn't have the techniques we have today, but can really, like, somebody with this pedigree, like, not be able to identify a human skeleton in its dimensions?
Here are clips from a video where the videographer was investigating the possibility a giant at one time lived in Homer, Ohio. This opening map is interesting because it can be seen how many different mounds exist in Ohio.
And I've had a lot of comments on giant skeletons being found and that controversy. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that today because I found a good ancient mound site. And then while looking around the other night, I found about 3 more connected to it, kind of. Well, why don't we go down to Knox County first of all? Fredericktown, Fredericktown is the name of the city. It's right down here. Some lost history we're going to talk about today, some mound sites that I just learned about recently. The mounds I'm going to show you today, I believe originally were like this one in Miamisburg. These are Edina mounds. They have a distinctive shape, and they go back maybe 2,000-3,000 years. They are the ones with the copper and the intricate artifacts, and some reports, very large skeletons. The first of these in Fredericktown I'm going to show you is called the Rowley Mound right down here. You can see the shape of it underneath the trees. This is one of these sites that is just kind of covered up today. I don't know how many people know about this site, but right down here, ancient mound that probably goes back about 2,000-3,000 years right down here. Now, one of the most common questions I get is, what about all these giant skeletons found in the mounds from state to state? And a lot of these stories match up. Were people sensationalizing in the 1800s, or were they writing the best description they could? Well, here, this is a story from earlier this spring. Tales of prehistoric giants lurk near Homer. I have talked about really large skeletons being found in the Ohio area before. The Seat Mounds, I believe the Dover Mound just over the Ohio River, a few other places here. But it says the ancient mound in Homer is a rare surviving relic of the mound builders' culture, which once flourished in central Ohio, leaving its wake of legends of giant skeletons found in mounds and temples excavated by early settlers who lacked the technology to preserve the giant bones. Here is an early map of Homer in 1854 with the landowners plotted out here. The gold star is a Dixon Mound that I was just showing you. But a little over, maybe a mile to the west, the Fulton property, it had a large mound that enclosed a stone structure. That is what is described. And I guess we can only use our imaginations to try to figure out what was once there. Here's the area of the Fulton property in 1854. They said a farmhouse was built on the mound site. Not sure where this would be, but it said it enclosed a stone structure. I find that very fascinating. Not sure where this location is. I don't think we have a farmhouse from 1854 remaining, but it could be right down in this area right here. Just doing a little reading here. This article starts off talking about the Newark earthworks and the dispute with the county. Then it goes into the site down in Homer. It says, according to the 1881 History of Licking County, in 1824, an excavation of a prehistoric fort on the river bank adjacent to the Homer Cemetery revealed a very large human skeleton. It is stated that the jawbone would go over the face of the largest man present, with 2 hands placed between. It says the cemetery sits on a bluff, which may have been the location of the fort described. Modern researchers would conclude that the earthwork was more likely a sacred temple, considering that such structures are sometimes found containing ritualistic artifacts, but rarely any evidence of battle. It says the history book adds that around 1931, a group of local men dug 15 feet down into the mound across the street, which is formerly known as the Dixon Mound, also known as the Williams Mound. But that is the mound I've been showing you in Homer. It says over 50 years later, in May 1885, the Newark Advocate reported on the discovery of 2 giant skeletons in Homer. A few days since, one of the residents of Homer, in passing through a field, accidentally saw human bones protruding from the earth in a side hill, which proved to be of gigantic size. Upon further excavation, 2 large skeletons were revealed, both large enough for the skulls to completely encase a modern adult male's head with room to spare. Seems they were retelling a story that was written maybe 50 years before here. It says a report in the New York Times, Dateline, Canterbury, says that the initial find was made by Homer schoolboys and that subsequent digging by adults turned up 2 more skeletons and numerous flint artifacts. The Times article states that 3 of the skeletons were measured in excess of 7 feet in height, while the largest was over 8 feet tall. A report from the McCook Weekly Tribune from a week later ups the total to 5 skeletons and adds that the skeletons were all found with their feet pointing towards the east on a stone platform 5 feet beneath the surface of the mound. Burned bone fragments, charcoal, drinking vessels, and flint weapons were found as well. The most striking articles, besides the skeleton, the article continues, were a finely finished stone pipe, a bowl being large and polished and engraved with considerable care in a simple way. The figures are birds and beasts. A knife shaped like a sickle reversed and having a wooden handle held by leather thongs, and a kettle holding perhaps 6 quarts. Those were all found with the burials, and those are consistent with things found in Adena mounds. The 1881 history also notes the presence of 3 mounds 1 mile west of Homer on the property of farmer Robert Fulton. The book says that one of these mounds was flattened to provide the site for a farmer's house, while the other 2 remained. One of those mounds was excavating, revealing a dome-shaped stone building about 10 feet in diameter and about 3 feet tall. Probably a burial chamber, but it says this seems reminiscent of other mound structures that have been identified as Adena mounds, dating as far back as 2500 BC. Speculation has run rampant over the years about large skeletons, which have been disregarded by official institutions such as the Smithsonian. Skeptics suggest that the reports were hoaxes spread by newspapers more interested in intriguing readers than checking facts. And that is the big question about all these articles written in the 1800s. How much of them supply facts? How much were sensationalized? But it's certainly interesting because a lot of them matched. Just going on here, it says, but the sheer scope of these reports through the 19th century makes it hard to believe it was nothing more than a hoax. Collectors of these reports have filled books, but the big problem is that none of these skeletons are known to still exist, because upon exposure to oxygen, it seems the ancient bones quickly deteriorated. Skeptics find that mighty convenient for the hoax explanation, but it is well enough documented that ancient buried bones do decay rapidly when exposed to humid conditions. It also says other skeptics have pointed out that ancient bones could well have become disarticulated, allowing space between the joints and giving a false impression of height. This does not, however, explain the large skulls described in these reports. This is the Knox Pages. Here is Mark Sebastian Jordan, the guy who wrote it. I enjoyed this article. I enjoy sharing other people's work looking into this mound mystery. But he concludes it this way. He says he's not sure what to think. It says, one thing is certain though, if there was a class of giants, Central Ohio was their sacred center. More mounds, earthworks, and reports of these finds come from here than anywhere else. This was once a spiritual center of an entire culture's world.
Are these investigators tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists? Or were there strange going-ons in the past in the land that is now called Ohio? So many of the reports come from newspaper accounts, so that seemed like the logical place to investigate for corroborating evidence. Let me share some of the accounts I uncovered. Beneath a small mound, at 5 feet below the normal surface, 5 gigantic skeletons, with their feet to the east, were found. The skeletons are of enormous size, the head of one being the size of a wooden bucket. A quarter of a mile northwest of the fort is the burying ground, where bones have been exhumed of men that were perhaps 10 feet tall. This region has for years been a profitable field for students of Indian archaeology. Many mounds have been opened, and almost always with results. Last week, a small mound near Homer was opened, almost by accident, and a huge skeleton found in a bad state of preservation. In the center of the excavation, lying face down and side by side, were 4 giant skeletons in a state of fine preservation. The men in life must have been 9 feet tall. The jawbones of one were easily passed over a man's head to his shoulders, and the cranium of the other would only just go into a large wooden bucket. The excavators found near the center of the mound, at a depth of 14 feet, the massive skeleton of a man encased in copper armor. The head was covered by an oval-shaped copper cap. The jaws had copper moldings. The arms were dressed in copper. And at the side of this skeleton was a female skeleton, the two being supposed to be those of man and wife. Excavators believe they have at last found the king of the mound builders. Elwood Mitchell unearthed a skeleton of giant size at the prehistoric graveyard on the Ohio Falls. The femur and tibia are each 39 inches long. The man must have been over 10 feet tall. The skeleton of a prehistoric giant was exhumed near Bowling Green, Ohio. The skeleton, when pinned together, measured nearly 9 feet in length. The skull measured almost 12 inches in diameter, and there are 2 distinct rows of teeth in the massive jaw. The bones are well preserved, with the exception of the pelvic bones, which are considerably decayed. Some boys, while playing on Barrett Mound in the village of Spring Valley, southwest of Springfield, Ohio, discovered a number of human bones that had been unearthed by the upheaval of a tree during a windstorm. The skeletons indicated a race of people close to 8 feet in height, and from relics and other indicators were apparently warriors and belonged to some prehistoric race. In the mound, they came across several skeletons of immense proportions, which indicated that they were the framework of men who must have been at least 7 to 8 feet tall. So we turn to the original question: is there evidence to suggest giants at one time lived in modern-day Ohio? I wasn't able to fully investigate the topic because this was a class project and I only had a couple weeks to complete it. So what can I say for certainty? There were mound builders in Ohio. Anyone can go and visit the evidence. There is historical evidence there may have been a giant couple that lived in Seville, Ohio. There are researchers, including one that was featured in a show on the History Channel, that believe there were giants in Ohio. I was able to uncover quite a few newspaper articles that corroborated the videos and pictures that I found. While I can't state for certainty there were giants in Ohio, I can state for certainty there is enough evidence to suggest the possibility. And that possibility is one of gigantic proportions.